Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
Well, modern technology will be the death of us all, and things change so quickly that it's scary. Just a few years ago, it seemed kind of neat. You could send your DNA into some private company and find out who your ancestors were. And now, of course, we hear the police are digging through that and catching people who committed crimes because there's a huge database of stuff they can look at. Well, the same thing is now happening with Google and the tracking they do with your phone. And a lot of people don't know this. Some people are vaguely aware of this, but the extent to which it goes, I think, shocks most people when they hear it. Stories from NBC News was passed along to me by both Eric and David. Headline: Google tracked his bike ride past a burglarized home, and that made him a suspect. From NBC News, John Shoup wrote the story. The email arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in January, startling Zachary McCoy as he prepared to leave for his job at a restaurant in Gainesville, Florida. It was from Google's legal investigations support team, writing to let him know that local police had demanded information related to his Google account. The company said it would release the data unless he went to court and fought it. And he had 7 days if he wanted to do that. Now the question is, really? You got to go into court and hire an attorney and do all this stuff to fight to keep them from giving up information you don't know what they're doing it for? So McCoy is 30 years old. He says, I was hit with a really deep fear. He didn't think he'd done anything wrong, but he had an Android phone, which he had a Google account on, and he used several products on that phone, including Gmail and YouTube, but police now wanted access to all of it. And again, it was unclear what triggered this. So he says, I didn't know what it was about, but I knew the police wanted to get something from me. I was afraid I was going to get charged with something, but I don't know what. And that's the problem, of course, when you're innocent and they don't tell you what you're being accused of. It becomes Kafkaesque very quickly. There was only one clue. In the notice from Google was a case number. McCoy searched for it on the Gainesville Police Department's website and found a one-page investigation report on the burglary of a woman's home 10 months earlier. The crime had occurred less than a mile from the home that McCoy shared with two other people. So now McCoy was even more panicked and confused because he had nothing to do with the burglary, and he'd never been inside that house, and didn't know why anybody might think he was involved in any way, shape, or form. So he worried that going straight to the police would lead to his arrest. So he went to his parents' home in St. Augustine, where over dinner he told them what was happening. So they agreed to pony up for an attorney. Good parents. The lawyer that they got dug around and learned that the notice had been prompted by a geofenced warrant, a police surveillance tool that casts a virtual dragnet over a crime scene, sweeping up Google location data drawn from users' GPS, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, and cellular connections, everybody within a certain area. The warrants have increased dramatically in the last 2 years, can help police find potential suspects when they have no leads otherwise. They also, unfortunately, scoop up data from people who have nothing to do with the crime. So theoretically, they got data from every single person who went by in front of that home. Every single person. And they're doing this, of course, without your knowledge. Google itself has described it as a significant incursion on privacy. But the problem, of course, is that Google has got to comply with the law also. Still worried, McCoy examined his phone. He is a biker, and he used an exercise tracking app to record his rides. The app relied on his phone's location services, which fed his movements to Google. He looked up his route on the day of the burglary and saw that he had ridden past the victim's house, and that was part of his frequent rides to the neighborhood. He said it was a nightmare scenario. I was using an app to see how many miles I rode, and now it's putting me at the scene of a crime and made me a suspect. The victim was a 97-year-old woman who told police she was missing several pieces of jewelry worth more than $2,000. 4 days after she reported the crime, Gainesville police, having no leads, went to a county judge with a warrant for Google. In it, they demanded records of all devices using Google services that had been near the woman's home when the burglary was thought to have taken place, but they weren't sure exactly when it was, so they had to kind of guess on that. The first batch of data would not include identifying information. Police would then sift through it for devices that seemed suspicious and ask Google for the names of those users. Kenyon said police told him they became particularly interested in McCoy's device, Kenyon being the attorney, after reviewing the first batch of anonymized data. They didn't know the identity of the device's owner, so they returned to Google to ask for more. That triggered the January 14th notice that they sent to McCoy, part of its general policy on notifying users about government requests for their data. The notice was McCoy's only indication that police wanted anything from him. Gainesville police, meanwhile, won't comment. While privacy and civil liberties advocates have been concerned that geofence warrants violate constitutional protections from unreasonable searches, law enforcement authorities say those worries are overblown. Of course they do. They say that their first net doesn't get anything specific about you, and the information alone is not enough to justify charging someone with a crime. Google geofence warrants have been used by police agencies around the country, including the FBI. Google said in a court filing last year the requests from state and federal law enforcement authorities were increasing rapidly by more than 1,500% over the last couple of years, and by 500% from 2018 to 2019. Kevin Armbruster is a retired lieutenant with the Milwaukee Police Department, said it's a great tool and a great technology. Milwaukee police have used Google geofence warrants to solve an array of crimes, including homicides, shootings, a string of robberies and kidnappings, and a sexual assault involving an abduction, he said. I would think the majority of citizens in the world would love the fact that we are putting violent offenders in jail. Yeah, but we're also not cool about the fact that you pinpoint some guy and say, yeah, you rode by the house, we can prove it, you are therefore a suspect. There have been very few court challenges to Google geofence warrants, mainly because the warrants are done in secret and defense lawyers may not realize the tool is even used to identify their clients. One exception is an accused bank robber in Midlothian, Virginia, who is fighting the charge by arguing the geofence warrant used against him was illegal, and that case is still pending. So, when McCoy realized his bike ride had placed him near the scene of the crime, he had a strong theory of why police had picked his device out of all others. He and Kenyon set out to keep them from getting any more information about him and persuade them that he was innocent. So here he is, now, having to persuade the police that he is innocent, which of course is backwards. Kenyon said he got on the phone with the detective in the case and told him you were looking at the wrong guy. For most of his life, McCoy said he had tried to live online anonymously, a habit that dated the early days of the internet, where there was less expectation that people would use their real names. He used pseudonyms on his social media accounts and the email account that Google used to notify him about the police investigation. But until then, he hadn't thought much about Google collecting information about him. He said, I'm sure it's in their terms of service, but I never read through those walls of text, and I don't think most people do either. Just before the start of his ordeal, he listened to a call-in radio debate about the Department of Justice's fight with Apple over access to an iPhone left by a Saudi national who had gunned down several people at an airbase in Pensacola. And he said, kind of like, well, that's an isolated incident. What are the odds of that happening to me? He says, if you're innocent, that doesn't mean you can't be in the wrong place at the wrong time, like going on a bike ride in which your GPS puts you in a position where police suspect you of a crime you didn't commit. So on January 31st, he and his attorney filed a motion in the civil court to render the warrant null and void and block the release of any information about McCoy. At that point, Google had not turned over any data that identified McCoy, but would have done so if Kenyon hadn't intervened. So they spent some money on this. The attorney argued that the warrant was unconstitutional because it allowed police to conduct sweeping searches of phone data from untold numbers of people in order to find a single suspect. The filing seemed to give law enforcement authorities second thoughts about the warrant. Not long afterward, Kenyon said a lawyer in the state attorney's office assigned to represent the Gainesville Police Department told him there were details in the motion that led them to believe that Kenyon's client was not the burglar. So the state attorney's office withdrew the warrant, saying it was no longer necessary, and the office did not respond to a request for comment. And you might say, Steve, that's just the system working the way it should. Well, number one, the guy to spend money on his attorney. And number two, you got to wonder what would happen if he hadn't fought it and they'd gotten the information. Said, look, you rode right by the house. And boom. And we always hear stories about people who are wrongly accused, wrongly tried, even wrongly convicted, crimes they didn't do. And so I don't blame anybody who's innocent saying, I'm not going to wait to go to trial to defend myself. I'm going to start defending myself right now. Do anything I can to defend my good name. And I had several people send me that story, including the two guys I mentioned at the top, Eric and David. And the reason they sent it to me, both of them said, dude, you ride, you run. This affects you. Because I do use running apps and biking apps and exercise apps that track where I go, so that at the end of my run or bike or whatever it is I'm doing, ride, I can press the button and it stores the information. And then later on, I can go online and look at all the data and my maps, blah, 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 blah. And the idea that somebody can go digging through that, looking for somebody who may have been near a crime scene, bothers me. Now, the weird part about it is that if a police officer or a witness or anybody said, I saw a guy go riding by here. I see him all the time. Blonde-haired guy, And let's say he's riding a bike, and he's riding an obnoxious bright day-glow green bike, because the bike actually is a bright color. And I see him every single day, and he rides by at roughly the same time. And so he may have ridden by yesterday when the crime was committed. Let's make up facts here. Hypothetical. So the cops wait for me the next day. I come riding by, and they stop, and they go, "Excuse me," and I say, "Yeah, I'm Steve Lehto." And they go, "Okay, what do you do?" And I say, I'm an attorney, and I write books, and I do videos on YouTube. This will probably be a video. Why? And they say, "Oh, well, because we're curious. Did you come by here yesterday?" Now, many of you would say, "Steve, if you wanted to, you could be quiet at that point, because you could say, 'Hey, I'm not answering questions. I want an attorney present.'" Oh, wait, I am an attorney. But I could just go quiet and go, I'm really feel no need to answer your questions. But since I've done nothing wrong, I might be inclined to say, yes, I did. Why? Now, the interesting thing is, the police could play this two different ways. They could say, "We want to ask you if you saw anything. You're a potential witness." Or they could say, "We think you're a potential suspect. Therefore, we're quizzing you because we might want to arrest you for a crime that we think you may have committed yesterday when you rode by here." And that's the interesting thing about this, is that they couch this in the language of, we're trying to get this information so we know who to charge, when they should be couching it in the language of, we're just simply trying to solve a crime. And, if they can get the data that's so specific that actually shows somebody went around the back of the house and they went into the house and came back out of the house, yeah, that person's obviously a suspect, right? But the fact that somebody rode back and forth in front of the house during the time the crime was committed, that person might be a witness, but not necessarily a suspect, right? So, I'm not saying that they should be allowed to do it in either setting, because there's constitutional safeguards against that. But I'm more just opining here. Means turn an opinion into a verb. I'm opining about the fact that they are trying to look for people to charge, not let's solve a crime. Okay, and that's really I think one of the problems with this approach. They should be approaching is, how do we solve a crime? And one way you solve a crime is through good old-fashioned homework. And you actually go out and do the work, the legwork, as they say, where you actually go out and ask people, what did you see, witnesses, and so on. I remember when I was a little kid, there was a murder 2 blocks from my house, very, very unusual in the neighborhood I lived in. First murder in that town in years. And the police actually went door to door. Door to door. Did you see anything? Did you hear anything? No. Boom, boom, boom. They were putting in the work to try to solve the crime. Nowadays they would just apparently geofence the neighborhood and harass anybody who's near that house and potentially accuse them of the crime. So, very strange. We're going to see a lot of litigation in this field, and I think, unfortunately, we're going to see a lot of evolution in the field of what happens to our data, because there are companies out there that make so much money off our data that's going to be extremely hard to be anonymous in the future. It's going to be really, really hard to say, I don't want people tracking me, because people tracking you make money off of you. So it would be nice if you could flip a switch and say, hey, I don't want to be tracked anywhere. And you're going to say, Steve, if you don't want to be tracked, you can't use that funky app of yours. Well, might be workarounds for that, but that's the point. So Google tracked his bike ride past a burglarized home, and that made him a suspect. So Eric and David, thank you for the note. NBC News, thank you for the story. And I got to thank my good friend Rob in Australia, who sent me this beautiful shirt. And, it's a Ford. It is a Ford, but it's an Australian Ford. And so, although I tended to think of my affinity for race cars to be Chrysler-oriented, I will respect the Australian Ford for what it is. It's a very cool car. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. A Saturn car? It's the best worst car you'll ever own.